Before I met my spouse, I had envisioned what I wanted in in them. I I set up, you know, different characteristics that I thought that they would have, in which things were going to be okay. It was going to be smooth sailing. There would never be any arguments or fights. There would just be just nothing but love and romance like you see in, different movies. And, that's what I had envisioned. So, when I create videos, I come up with ideas that, God gives me, and he gives me usually what to write down. But never in my videos am I ever going to come across as somebody that has it all together. I I have flaws, and so the stuff that I speak on is usually stuff that God is working on my heart with. So with this message that you're going to hear, it's from somebody that has been through the pressure of, disagreements, somebody that has flaws in himself, issues of, trials in, loving, and, I don't have it all together. I have problems. I deal with hurts. I deal with, rejection. Sometimes I have wins. Sometimes I have losses regarding that. But, it's me coming closer to Jesus through it. It takes trials. It takes going over and over through the hurts until I can finally get it. And if there's any way that through my struggle that I can help you, so that you don't do what I do, but that you could take my example and not, follow the negatives that you may hear in my flawed thinking. Now, I'm speaking about flawed thinking regarding the flesh. That when I'm pushed up against a hard circumstance, sometimes I don't want to do what is right. If anything, I want to do what my flesh feels. If hurt, I want to hurt somebody else. It and it takes, sitting with God in order for me to learn to do what is right. So that is basically, what I was speaking on is having unrealistic expectations on your future spouse. Now, you may not even be married. Maybe you are married if you're listening to this, or maybe you're not married. And if you're not married, maybe you had put it in your mind about what you want your spouse to have and what you think that they're going to be like. And I'm telling you that that is an unrealistic expectation. It's not something that you should have, because what if they aren't what you had envisioned? Now, when I speak on each of these topics, I'm using myself as an example. But if you have done it yourself, maybe God's touching those areas too in your own heart. But I know for me personally, these are the issues that I have developed in, before I knew my spouse. So we can develop in our minds about what our spouses are going to be like. And, we think all positives, expecting them to be perfect, flawless, you know, just pure love from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. And it's like those romance movies like Jerry Maguire and, Titanic, where you got Jack that's out there, you know, expressing such a being a gentleman and stuff like that, but you never usually see any of their flaws. So, maybe women see that and they're like, "Oh, I want to be like with Jack or somebody like that." But, you've never even seen them at their worst. So if you haven't seen them at their worst, you're going to think, "Well, I'm starting to have second thoughts now. Well, that's the thing. You don't know the person. You're only seeing a small aspect of that person. You don't know them. So you're envisioning, what you want out of somebody only seeing through a small knot hole of that person and not the big picture. And that's what we can tend to do, you know? So like I said, we think in our minds, we use all these examples from movies and all that, and I want my spouse to have this, I want my spouse to have that. So when God goes to bring them to you, then you're disappointed because they don't act like you envisioned. We think in our minds that we won't have disagreements with our future spouse. And then we also think that we ourselves don't have issues. We can think that we are the most godly people on earth until God brings up the negative in our own hearts. And so we think our crap doesn't stink until God gives us someone that exposes it. And I've seen it in my own life. I could have thought that I was the most godly person until, my spouse has a bad day. And then that's where my heart really comes out. That's where the real negative of my heart comes out. How am I going to act when I'm bruised and when I'm facing a negative circumstance? That's when the real test comes. That's when the real test of love comes. What if our future spouse does something that, irritates us, and we see their own baggage, their own flaws, and their own hurts from their own lives. So then we have a mirror before us that, we place all our hopes and in what we envision in our spouse, and we try to get them to fit what we have envisioned. And when they don't, then the mirror is cracked. And then we're like, who did I marry? But that's the real problem, is that you haven't seen them. You haven't seen their baggage. You're only seeing, a small part of them. I thought to myself, before I met my spouse, I thought, you know what? My wife and we're going to make love every part of the day because here I've saved myself for them. My spouse is going to be agreeable with everything that I'm thinking about. You know, we're gonna do this at night. We're gonna do that at night, and different things. And so when your feet finally touch the ground and you see the truth of it, that they are not who you think or who you envisioned in your mind of who you think they should be and what you think they're going to do, then you get hurt. You get hurt because they're not working according to your expectations. So when the true fact of the matter was that when I met my spouse, that it's not what they wanted to do. Me thinking, well, we're going to get intimate every night. And when that didn't happen, when they didn't want to, then that's when the real test comes up. That's when the negative really comes out of your heart, is when you face that negative circumstance. When you see that they actually have a mind of their own, and they're not always agreeable with your mind, then that's when the real test comes. Now, when you marry, you can't try to mold them to fit your unrealistic expectation. And what's going to happen when they don't? Well, that circumstance is going to cause you to get angry and for no reason. And that's what the enemy wants to do. He wants you to be at division with them. He wants you to think, well, who did I marry? I didn't marry who I envisioned. They're not doing what I want them to do. And so when they don't, then that's when, the real problem comes. How are you going to react when they're not doing what you think they should do? And that's where the rejection and stuff comes up to the surface, just so God can help you to deal with it, and not for you to get all bent out of shape and refuse to work things out. How many divorces happen because people have an unrealistic expectation on their spouse, that they're expecting their spouse to be there to love them, and they don't have to take any responsibility in loving them when they're at their worst. That's the real problem. So how many divorces happen because of that? A lot happen because of, irreconcilable differences. You know, stuff that they refuse to work out, stuff that they refuse to talk about. So when you try to, fit your spouse to your unrealistic expectation, you're setting them up to fail. They've already failed in your eyes. You know, they're you caused your future spouse to fail because they're not lining up with who you thought they were in your mind, and they're not lining up because they're not the person in the movies. They don't have those characteristics, you know? And the fact is that we as Christians need to learn to accept who our spouses are. That yes, they do have issues. That yes, they do have baggage. And it's learning to love them when they are at their worst. It's learning to appreciate them. It's learning to love, who they are when, they've done things that irritated you and said things that irritated you. And when you can move beyond that and say, you know what, I love you and I'm going to be there for you, irregardless of what you're, going through. I'm here for you. That's when you're really showing the love of God. God created them for you for a purpose, because there there are issues in your own heart that God wants to work on. So he's going to bring those issues up through your spouse. You may think that you're the most godly person ever until God brings you the person he has for you, and he shows you, you know, the issues in your own heart. And that's for the purpose of, strengthening you in him, for you to show that you do have flaws and that it's something that he needs to work out. Now, I don't want to say this in a negative way. I don't want people to take it negatively. And, for the person on the receiving end, our spouses, for us to, for them to hear the message and be like, well, I'm taking this from a negative point of view. So please don't take it what I'm saying negative. I want you to try to understand what I'm saying. Now, God gives us who we need, not necessarily what we have envisioned, because I have already spoke about when you're watching these romantic movies, you want your spouse to have those characteristics. And so God is not going to give you somebody that's not going to challenge you in your own heart. He's not going to give you somebody that's going to not challenge, the hurts in your own life. He's going to give you somebody that's going to bring those hurts up so he can deal with them. And I've heard in the past where, God doesn't give us what we want. He gives us what we need. And so, somebody could take that negatively and be like, well, you don't want me? I have my hurts. What, you don't want this? But, it depends on how you're going to phrase it. It really takes sitting with the person so they can know what you're trying to say. So, in times of my past, there was one girl that I liked when I went to Bible college. And, her and I spoke like every night, and, I didn't have the money to call her. We had this voicemail, that somebody gave me, and she would leave messages on it, and I would respond. She would hear my messages and stuff like that. And it went on for a year. And I had in my mind that, this is the way it's going to be. You know, it's going to be easy to love because here this person loves me and I love them and stuff like that. But you know what it was? It was nothing but a facade. It wasn't true love. You know what I mean? True love means that you're loving the person that you're with, you know, seeing their flaws and loving them regardless of what they're going through. You're taking the initiative in Jesus of taking that step, and you see the negative, and then you know what? You're choosing to love them, because it said that our fights are not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and the powers of the air. So if they're going through, an issue, it's the hurt that the enemy has brought them through, or it could be a demonic influence. So if you're going through a hard situation, then it takes loving the person, but not liking the spirit that they are struggling with. So if you have who you envision in your mind of who you want, you'll never grow in learning to love them, because everything's all, hearts and flowers, everything's positive. And so both hearts are never worked out. Your heart and your love is never going to be tested with the fire of true love. You know? So, really it takes, not taking romantic movies seriously because they're unrealistic, you know? And I'm not saying that, all romantic movies are bad. I want to see a romantic movie in which you see two flawed characters and that person's taking the extra step in loving them. Maybe there's movies out there. Maybe there's ones that I haven't even thought of, but maybe they're out there. So, maybe some have come to your mind as I'm speaking. So, if you see examples like that, take them. I think of the movie Fireproof, where, the husband and wife are close to a divorce. The husband's selfish, he's looking at pornography, and, there's this doctor that's coming on to the wife. And so, the husband picks up this Love Dare book, and it's a 40-day challenge of learning to love your spouse. So you got two flawed people, but God's teaching one of them to learn to love like he loves. And so the person saw their spouse at their worst. He tried doing things that showed love, but the wife didn't believe him because of his own, flaws that he was showing. And so he really needed God to help him, to go further. And that's what happened. So you have that one example of, what true love is, when you're beat down, in your relationship with your spouse and you see nothing but negative, and you can respond in true love in return, then it's truly a reflection of Jesus. So growing in true love, someone is at their worst, but you rise up and show love regardless. You're learning to love what you see as flaws in your spouse. You're learning to hear God and letting him guide you through each, negative circumstance. And in this, there is a war between the flesh and the spirit. In our flesh, we don't want to show love. When we're hurt, we want them to hurt. I've dealt with that many times in my relationship where, my spouse, says something wrong to me. I don't talk to her about it. So then I sulk. I keep it to myself. And then later, the circumstances bring up that negative to where I possibly snap at them, or I won't talk to them. Because if I don't talk to them, then I'm paying them back for how they treated me. So they have to dig out of me what the real problem is, instead of me being honest with them and telling them. You know? But something God is bringing me slowly to is, you know, whatever negatives that I have, you know, in loving, is that He's helping me to be able to overcome them slowly. If my spouse is at their worst, or they're not loving me the way, you know, I want them to, that He's helping me to see that it's nothing but an expectation. And, you know, you can't force your spouse to be, you know, to love you in the way you want them to love you. You know, so it's like so many spouses, and I already mentioned this, you know, my friends and I talked about how we were going to be intimate with our spouses every night. And when that didn't happen, then it was an unrealistic expectation. So what? We're going to put that on our spouse and blame them for not living to those expectations? You know, they have a mind on their own, you know? And if they don't want to do something, you can't force them to do it. So what? You're going to get upset because they won't? You know, so, you know, whatever the issues are, God brings the negative up, and He puts the option before us. You can either love them, or you can, you know, be bitter with them. And hopefully it's not going to be the latter. So lastly, it takes serving your spouse even if you don't want to. You know, what can you do around the house that would help them? What can you do to help them? You know, if they're treating you negatively, what can you do to serve them? You know, and the reason I'm saying that is because it's hard to love when we're facing negative. So, you know, it takes going to God, letting Him fill you with His love, and taking the initiative and loving them, even if you're not going to receive a reward in return, because that's showing God's character. So I'm going to end it here, and I pray that, you know, this video has blessed you. I pray that, you know, if you are walking through any kind of negative circumstances, that, you know, you would take the initiative and go to God, say, Lord, fill me with your love. You know, help me to love like you want me to love. And, you know, it really takes, you know, receiving His love to love them. So, like I said, you're not going to see me post videos of how holy I am and that I have it all together. I don't have it all together. I'm somebody that is on the path of learning how to love. I'm not there yet. Maybe sometimes I have wins, but, you know, sometimes I have losses. So I pray that through my own struggle, you can benefit from it. So I'm going to end it here. Thank you for taking the time to watch, and God bless you.